I think that, what I have experienced, and this is a very unscientific answer, is like you almost start to develop your own language and your own shorthand. And I think of it like APIs. I'm a product manager by trade. It's like you have your own endpoints that you're hitting back and forth between the advisor and yourself, because they know you and they also know what you know. And a huge part of this is understanding, just like in any partnership, where the other person is coming from. Like, what are they doing their own research? Are they going to need more explanation? Because I think just like any good relationship, you want to first serve and educate and make the most important thing is that you're understood. That is the thing.
Welcome to Knowing Me, Knowing You, the podcast for the future of wealth management. Thanks for being here. I'm Marla Sofer. Money is a tool. It empowers people. Let's dive into how technology is personalizing advice, strengthening connections, and creating lasting impact. If you're an advisor looking to differentiate, a fintech leader shaping the next wave, or a client ready to take control of your financial future, you're in the right place. Let's get started. Hi, I am so excited to welcome Colleen Wilson to the podcast today. I'm thrilled that I met Colleen through a mutual connection in fintech. And as I learned more about Colleen, I recognized how good of friends we were going to be and how much overlap we have in our background and how common our passion is to create a much better financial services industry that is centered around the needs of the customer. And so I've invited Colleen here. Before I allow her to introduce herself, she has been a product executive for years and years, leading improvements in wealth management, payment, and lending software. She's a fierce advocate for diversity and change in fintech, and she has supported multiple financial organizations on their innovation journey to achieving growth and all of their growth metrics. She started her career at Edward Jones, unifying the client experience across the country, and then worked at Square, Blueleaf, and Mantle, where she led product management, design, marketing, and operations. In addition to that, she's super involved in supporting startups. She's a member of Chief. She is passionate about supporting female founders, and she advises fintech companies as an advisor, bringing her wealth of real-world insights into all of the companies that are creating the financial services industry of tomorrow. So thank you so much for being here, Colleen.
Of course. Thank you for having me. I love this topic and I love what Nomi is doing. And so I'm thrilled to be part of this conversation.
Wonderful. You've had an incredible career so far. What excites you the most about the moment we're in fintech?
I think it's such a good question. And I think what really excites me about where we are in the history of fintech is that, in years past, so many people will be like, I'm not a fintech person. I'm not a financial services person. Everyone is a fintech person and everyone is a financial services person. The lines between what was a fintech company and what was a financial services company and what was any other type of company have been completely blurred. And you're seeing things like embedded finance. You're seeing things like banking as a service. And there are experiences that none of us would traditionally think of as financial experiences that are truly financial experiences. And that is by design. That is by design by these companies to make payments and money movement and wealth creation and participation in the economy so much more accessible and so much more seamless. And so as a product leader, that really excites me. As someone who is accumulating wealth for their family, that really excites me. And even just, in the last 20 years, I've seen the passion and the commitment to truly understanding the needs of customers really elevate, not only from like a defensive position, but mostly from a calling from in terms of like a societal movement. So that's really what excites me about the space and this time in the industry.
I love that. And just your explanation, when you first started talking, it made me reflect on my journey into fintech. I had worked for years in the guts of financial services at JP Morgan and at BlackRock. And then there was this wave kind of post 2008 of all these fintech companies that came out and were getting funding, and fintech was the rage, and consumer fintech and disrupting and democratization. And when I was interviewing up and down in Silicon Valley with these fintechs, they were like, oh no, you're financial services. We're looking for tech people. And there was no appetite for deeply understanding the realm of the industry and applying it into fintech. And I so agree with what you're saying, that everyone needs financial services embedded in the transactions they make, the goals they create, everything with respect to wealth accumulation and the purpose and journey they go through in life. So I love that. And on that same topic, in that flow, so you and I have spoken before, and you've said to me that customers are more than a data point in financial institutions. They go beyond a credit score or KYC, which historically, or today even, those are data that the industry has to collect or collects in order to serve their own purpose, to serve their own need. So tell me a little bit about your vision of this universal data set that goes beyond behavior and a credit score or a KYC to building deeper knowledge about a customer.
Yeah, it's such a good question. And like the thing that has always been interesting to me is, I remember 20 years ago, the notion of like KYC, KYB, it really comes from the BSA. It really comes from the Bank Secrecy Acts, and it comes from like a regulatory background. And that was when every financial institution that was making a loan or making a decision on the creditworthiness of an individual or a business, or even how high risk a business or individual was, it really was based off of two things. It was based off of your credit score, or usually it was based off of your risk tolerance. So, and you would be given a set of hypothetical situations, like if your money went down by X dollars, how would you feel? Which is, the spirit of that question is good. The execution of that question is poor. And how you apply that information to the next questions and what you do with it is even worse. And then the second thing is, what's your age? And I think, like, as we've learned over the years, that is not customizing the experience to a customer. It is asking them two pieces of information that you're slotting into a matrix so that it is consumable by a software product. So it's consumable by a computer. At the end of the day, saying I want to retire in Manhattan is very different than saying I want to retire in Missouri. It's a very different cost of living. It's a very different lifestyle. And so I think that, the idea of creating this universal data set, it's a problem that every financial institution I've worked at has had. You see this, how it manifests is you walk into a bank or you have a conversation with a financial advisor and they're asking you information, and then they provide you with a solution for a problem that you have. And then, later on, even in that conversation or the next week, the next year, they're asking you those same questions and rekeying that same information into another software product to do the exact same thing. And what you miss in that is the nuance of how can we create a composite of all of the information about Colleen, about Marla, and use that to offer customized solutions to predict her next question, to predict her next challenge. And how can we get there first? Customization is a lot more than just having my name in the top of the email or saying good morning or good evening based on my time zone. It has to do with really knowing your customer. It comes down to being able to say, were you even listening? That's really what it comes down to. And so I think like the leading financial institutions are taking the responsibility to build that universal data set. But I think forward-thinking companies are saying, how can we create a structure and a language and a means of allowing an individual with these needs to communicate that with organizations that serve them?
If you stand in the shoes of the customer, how, if you kind of look at it purely from the perspective of the bank client or any other financial institution client, what is it that the value that they would get out of that, the value out of sharing kind of a much more comprehensive universal data set with an institution?
I think the value that I would get out of that is a trust builder in knowing that I have a high confidence that the fidelity of what I have communicated is understood by that other third party. And if you think about it, most people who decide to go work with a financial advisor, and I can use myself as an example, I was a licensed financial advisor for 10 years. I never managed my own accounts. I said I was going to. Then I used another like hybrid solution. I think it was like Schwab Intelligent Portfolios when that was coming on. I thought it was super cool. And then, finally I was like, I'm just like not doing myself a service by managing the wealth that we are creating. My husband and I, we didn't have children at the time. And I ended up hiring a financial advisor, a local RIA here who I had met. And I think that the reason I hired him was not because I was incapable of doing that work on my own, but it was never a priority and I wasn't giving it the attention that it deserved. And I did not want to wake up later in life and be like, I only wonder what would have happened had I made this a higher priority. And so you're working with these third parties and with these providers for a higher level of service than what you can do yourself. And you're doing that to lessen worry so you can focus your attention and your time elsewhere. And so, that's really hard to give up that control, especially over something so important when you're unsure or you lack confidence on, do they truly understand what is important to me? And can they help me navigate those decisions?
Yeah. I love where you started that. It's about trust building. And if you are giving somebody over your money, and frankly, what money is trust, then you are building an opportunity for them to prove themselves, prove that I can trust you by showing me the right products, the right times, knowing who I am, and helping me achieve my goals over time. Mm-hmm. And as you do that, the trust meter continues to go up. And if I give you information and you send me something that's entirely irrelevant, then the trust meter goes down. And so it changes that interaction between the industry and an individual that recognizes the individual's own context and circumstances and allows the institution to deliver so much more value over time. Mm-hmm. So now that you've got so much experience deep inside the operations of these institutions, what is blocking them from this vision of the universal data set? And the answer might be a very long list, but as you kind of think about the major ones.
I'll try to make it as concise as possible. So there are a lot of blockers. So especially if you look at the ethos and the spirit of why wouldn't we want to offer these beautiful, customized experiences for our customers? What stands in the way? There's really three things from my perspective. I think the first one is process, and that usually is predicated on talent. Do I have the right people and the right talent asking these types of questions, ingesting, because all of this data is still ingested by human beings first, because it's provided by human beings. And so finding that interface, that human connection interface of how I take in that information and how I capture it is still, do I use is it a banker? Is it an advisor? What's the intake process? What questions do we ask? Is that really sufficient? I don't think it is. The first gap, I think, is talent and process. The second one is technology. Once I have, and the structure really of that data is once I have that information from Marla or Colleen, where do I put it and how is it structured? Because at the end of the day, if you're building a universal data layer, that is a database, and databases have the notion of fields of data and how is that data stored? And a lot of this is free-form conversation. Now there's some beautiful new products on the market that can help structure unstructured data to varying degrees of being good or not. But I think the next step is once you've actually brought in that information, how are you storing it so you can access it later and you can use that to more deeply serve that customer? And then finally, I think the last part is strategy. And part of that is compliance, is I think there is still a lot of fear, especially with the current cycle that we're in with the CFPB and what have you around am I collecting too much information? All of this information is in disparate places. And if I bring it together, what liability do I have and how do I take care of that data? Because that is also an opportunity it takes years to build trust, but it can be lost in an instant. And it's not just regulatory trust, it's trust with that individual, which I would argue is probably a much deeper fear. And so I think then the last part is what is our strategy for what to do with this data from a risk standpoint? What are we comfortable with? And where are we investing? Because there's no point in having all of that information if you're not going to do anything with it. So I think that those are really the key things that stand in the way.
Yeah. What a fabulous answer. There's a lot to go off of there. And I think with respect to your first point, so we've done so many interviews with financial advisors and banks and really getting a sense of how do you get to know people? And even at that ultra high net worth level, there's kind of this growing trend where they use this stack of cards. It's like a little card deck where they have conversations and say, which of these
UX practice, like a card sort.
Yeah. And they do it with real cards, physical cards, and they go into the meeting, and their purpose as an advisor is to get to know the next generation, to really understand where is this wealth going and which cards are they going to pick. But when we ask them in our interviews, then what? Where does that information go? Is there a structure? Is there, do you type it in somewhere? The answer is no. They're just doing this card game.
It goes in Salesforce in a giant blob of text that
That's right.
no program knows how to iterate and traverse over and garner any insights out of. It's a big problem. It's a really
It is a big problem. And it doesn't matter how much money you have, was my learning, is that this is true for somebody with $5,000 and it's true for somebody for $500 million. The mousetrap is quite broken. The other thing, I love what you said. You said process, structure, compliance. And coming back to kind of this last piece, when you think about, let's kind of play forward, how you might envision a world, and of course relates to kind of Nomi and where we're going, but how you might envision a world where it's the consumer that controls how they get to be known. And you're taking away that compliance and risk that you mentioned CFPB is looking at, saying, wait a second, do you have more data than you actually need for your business purposes?
Yes.
And even if they do, as long as a client opts in and says, I'm okay with them having it because I've opted into it, that changes every dynamic. Sorry, this is a slightly disjointed question, but you kind of referenced cutting clutter out of the system. And then you referenced like this compliance risk. And so kind of playing that forward, how do you see this? Like, it's a win-win if you transition control of the data.
100%. Now, it solves part of the problem, but it does not solve everything. You're still going to have those structural problems because now you're basically asking all technology providers to ingest data in the same way. And we all know that's not going to happen. But I do think that, the spirit of all these regulations, and you can see this even going back to back 10 years with GDPR and things like that. It's about consent. It's about knowing what I am releasing to people and how it is going to be used in terms that I understand, and saying, I chose this. I chose to make this information available to this person. And I do think that the single most empowering thing that regulatory bodies can do and that other companies can do is really put that control back into the hands of the person who that information belongs to.
Amen. I love that.
That I think that's truly where you're going to find financial freedom, is saying like the access to that information and the ability to revoke that information that lies with me because it's my life and it's my decision, it's my data. And I think that not only will it increase, I think, transparency and autonomy for the individual, but I think it also is a way of allowing every individual to practice radical responsibility about their own finances. It's no one else's responsibility to make sure you get to where you want to go. Now you can hire teams and bring in resources to help you get there, but no one really knows what it is that you specifically want or why that's important to you. And that it's a challenge, I think, to each of us to know ourselves truly and deeply and take control over how we share that information, what we expect to have happen with it.
What if financial planning wasn't just about numbers, but about you, your values, your goals, your vision for the future? Nomi is transforming client discovery for wealth managers, going beyond assets and risk scores to uncover what truly matters. With behavioral insights and real-time data, Nomi helps advisors personalize advice, build deeper connections, and grow their businesses. Because the best financial decisions start with knowing you. Discover the future of client engagement at nomi.com.
Actually, it's a beautiful segue into kind of the next question, which is going back to the perspective of the consumer and building trust again. And so I love radical responsibility and recognizing that when you outsource, and I feel like I've had several conversations to this end recently where we kind of have in our society said that if you have a lot of money, that means you think about it less. You shove that off to someone else.
You can argue more money, more problems, but everyone has problems. When you don't have money, when you do, it's just a different set. Yeah.
I think that financial advisors, financial planners, wealth managers, they kind of have this role of, let me take that problem off your hands. And I think that a better way of looking at it might be, let me act as your extension and use all of my credentials and skills to do what you want to be done with this money. Mm-hmm. And in order to know that, I need a lot more input from you. It's that radical responsibility. I'm your extension. You're hiring me. You're paying me for a service. Yeah. Let me make sure that this service is serving your needs and your interests. So going back to the question on building trust in today's environment, how have you witnessed both in your personal and professional life that the trust is struggling? And you and I have chatted about this before. How do you know that the advisor is doing their job well? How do you know that it's going well? How do you kind of see this this vision relative to the pain that is experienced today?
It's a hard question to answer because, it's like, do you want to run a back test on your own money with somebody that you're hiring to help manage your money? Like, people aren't algorithms, and trust me, you're talking to somebody who sits in front of a computer and plays with computers all day long and uses software to solve problems. But I think that, there's a couple things here. So like when trust is really deep, I think that, what I have experienced, and this is a very unscientific answer, is like you almost start to develop your own language and your own shorthand. And I think of it like APIs. I'm a product manager by trade. It's like you have your own endpoints that you're hitting back and forth between the advisor and yourself, because they know you and they also know what you know. And a huge part of this is understanding, just like in any partnership, where the other person is coming from. Like, what are they doing their own research? Are they going to need more explanation? Because I think just like any good relationship, you want to first serve and educate and make the most important thing is that you're understood. That is the thing. I've had good advisory experiences and I've had bad advisory experiences. And I shouldn't say bad, but just not as good. And I think, for me, how do I know my advisor is doing a really good job? I think number one, I am not worried about their decisions nor their intentions with my money. I am super clear on how they are compensated, and I am clear about what success looks like for them and for me. And I can wake up and think like, I don't want to say, am I red, yellow, and green? I'm not a day trader, but like overall, is this what I expected? We've been through some rocky market cycles. That's what I expected. When I signed up for the portfolio that I chose, I knew I was taking on some of that risk. I don't take those risks in other areas of my life. So I think like that, it's really more of, are you on the same page in terms of expectations? That is the single most important thing. And that comes from truly understanding your own risk tolerance and finding an advisor that you communicate really, really well with, and you can find that natural rhythm with. Tools help. They help create that transparency. There's also been times where the single largest trust building experiences I have had is when my advisor, through information that was or was not updating or what have you, noticed something that I didn't and proactively asked me questions on things that I had not raised. Like, have you thought about this? Have you thought about that? And that tells me that like they're in sync with what I am going through, and they're able to kind of predict. Now, do they have a system that does this? I don't really know. I didn't build it if they did, but it's something, it comes from just that deep, deep trust and that open communication. On the flip side, when I've had experiences that have eroded trust, the single biggest thing is that I did not feel understood. I felt as though the decisions I was making were not being approached with curiosity. They were being approached with judgment. And I'm a really big believer that advisors are there to advise, not decide. I don't care. Like every advisor, I think advisors should be fiduciaries, or at least act like it, whether or not they're regulated in that way. But a big part of that is you're there to help that individual achieve their notion of success. If that doesn't feel natural to you, or it's not something that you would prefer, that's fine. You have your own path. Make a different decision. But I think that those are the times when I have not felt served. And so I think that having a common language that we can speak is the foundation of building that trust. And that's really, truly like what excites me about what Nomi is doing, is creating that level of transparency.
Beautiful. I love that you touched on the same word several times, and you said it's about being understood. Mm-hmm. And thinking about the demographics that we're looking to help the most. And we're focused on women. We're focused on this really shiny, bright object called the intergenerational transfer of wealth. And we know that women are making more money. They're coming into more money. They're more educated than ever before. They have more economic power than they've ever had before. We've watched the Taylor Swift effect and the Beyonce effect. And we've watched all of the excitement behind kind of political movements, we'll say. And we're watching a gender normalization of no, women have a voice and they have power. And I would love to kind of come back to what you said about, it's about being understood, not judged. It's about sharing information and not having that overlay of judgment. So if you think about women and the opportunity with women, what are your thoughts around where the industry has just gotten it wrong so far? And how do you see tech helping that?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I think that the industry has gotten it wrong in a few different ways. Number one, I think that the interest in women a lot of times has come solely from the focus of women live longer and they're about to inherit a lot of rich men's money. And I think that is a oversimplification and just candidly not true. We are at a moment in time, I'm an elder millennial, I'm in my early 40s, where most of my friends have higher levels of education than their partners, and most are in heterosexual relationships. Many are married, some are not. Most have children, some do not. Most of them are just as highly educated, if not more educated. Many are the higher earner in their family. And many of them are making difficult decisions about what to do with their parents. And they may be like me and decided to have children later in life. And that was a much different path than, had I decided to have children in my 20s. And so these are the constraints that women have. But I think one of the biggest challenges we have is bias. And that is really what makes me super excited about technology, is that, there's still, I think, quite a big stigma around women not liking the numbers or not being about the numbers or not being comfortable with money or comfortable
girl
with
math.
Or comfortable with technology. And I'm like, I can tell you right now, it's girl math that's doing my family's portfolio. And it's been doing quite well. But I think that, it's been a bit dumbed down to the point where candidly, it's just a bit insulting. And I think we've really, there's quite a bit of bias. And I do think it's changing, but I think technology has a way of expediting that and making it a little bit more flat, and making it a little bit more equitable. That's what makes me excited about it. And I think, honestly, the more women who are interested in their money and their finances and see that as an avenue and the lubricant of getting to where they want to in life, that is how change actually happens. But it starts with, opening a bank account and not assuming that you need your husband's sign off to open that bank account, or,
right. Which is still relatively new.
It happened to me 7 years ago.
Historically.
Starting a business. Yeah. Or, sending my parents that I was graduating from business school, which I paid for by myself because I assumed it was paid for by them. It was not. It was paid for by me and my husband. So it's just, that will work itself out over time, but it starts with pulling up a seat, getting comfortable with your own financial situation, and again, practicing that radical responsibility.
Oh, I love that. To use your word, I think it's even more than insulting. What we found in a lot of our interviews in speaking with so many women is that almost one for one, everyone we spoke to has a story. And most people have multiple stories of being ignored. A financial professional, usually a financial advisor, a banker who doesn't make eye contact with them, doesn't even consider or acknowledge that they're in the room. And they're beyond insulted. They're pissed off. They've had enough and they're fed up. And the last thing that they want to do is build trust with an industry that has made them feel ignored, not shamed, and shamed and judged and misunderstood. And there's kind of this maybe bias that says, oh, the wife is who you talk to when it comes to budgeting. She's the one that's doing all of that shopping.
Which really is making about 80% of the household decisions, but that is a massive part of US GDP. Let's just not forget that.
Totally. Agreed. 100%. So you're also a member of Chief. Yeah. And Chief is focused on empowering women to be heard, to be understood, to reach their own professional and personal development and impact goals, joining boards and all the things that they want. And I'm curious how this concept of being understood, a financial identity, fits into how a community might be looking to deliver real value to their members, and giving something tangible either to women who might be listening or men who participate in these communities and want to have more impact. They want to take control and be a part of social change, and how their data, their financial identity might play a role.
Absolutely. I think one of the things that Chief has done really, really well is there are a lot of resources within Chief around things like really taboo topics that traditionally people have shied away from, like salary negotiation and understanding benefits packages and comp packages and things like that. And I think that is a really big part of kind of what got us into the situation that we are in and now navigating ourselves out of, which I think is really the rise of the deeply educated and highly assertive woman who understands her worth. And this is if you look at the data, there still is a wage gap between men and women, and it's even greater for women of color and for minorities. And that deeply needs to change. It starts with education, and it starts also with the resources about how to have that conversation in a way where you are likely to be successful, and how to have that conversation and how to get yourselves into the room where those decisions are happening. It takes time. And so like those are some of the tools that I have really appreciated. The other thing is just the community of knowing that I am not alone. And as I have navigated some of those career moves myself, learning from the lessons of other women and, getting down to brass tacks of like, what words did you use? Did you say this in an email or in a Slack? Should I call them? Like, how would you approach this? Should I talk about it now or later? It's that level of candor that I think really makes a change. And then I think lastly, like, this is not an evolution that is going to be carried on the shoulders of women. Like if you are a husband and you're meeting with a financial advisor and they're asking you to make a decision, say, I need to speak with my wife. This is her decision too. Or say that, about your partner, and say it when it's her decision and not yours at all. Like it's those types of actions that, seem micro and seem small, but those things add up. And that is really, I think it's gonna be less of a movement and more of just these behavioral changes that all of a sudden we look back and go, what the heck were we doing all those years? So that is my hope. I hope that like when my son is 16 months, I hope that like when he is in his early 40s, he's like, Mom, I read about this. And I'd be like, oh, honey, let me tell you a couple of stories. And I hope that it is so far from what he believes is normal.
Yes, I love that. I echo a lot of those hopes and feel the same. I'm in a different stage and my daughter just went off to college. I look at this experience she's going into and the value of community that is going to help her, promote her, help her recognize, no, you can be in control of your financial future. And knowing so much more about what that means to you gives you that right. It gives you the right to be in control because you're not ceding it to someone else to define it for you. Last question, Colleen. What is one instance in your life, a conversation you've had, or something that happened to you that has totally changed your relationship with money?
I can credit my dad for this. My father he was a business owner for many years. He's retired now. He's a full-time grandpa. One of the things when I got my first job out of college, he sat down with me and we made a budget and we went through and he was like, this is what taxes are going to cost you. And like that education of being like, these are levers that you have. You don't need to be going out to bars and spending money on this, or you can, but just know you're not going to be buying groceries for 2 weeks. Putting myself in the driver's seat and actually helped me build a model to understand my finances. So that's like the first thing that really made me realize that like, I am the driver of this ship and that it's my ship from the beginning. It might be small now, but these same tools are going to help me build a much bigger ship. And the second thing was he taught me a lot about negotiation and how to do that from a place of gratitude and openness versus being adversarial, and coming at a negotiation from a point of understanding and bringing data and seeking a resolution that everyone is more happy with than unhappy with. And I can use an example of when I was I worked in financial services in 2008 and 2009. I was freshly out of school, just a couple of years, but like no one was getting raises during this time. My job, though, had changed very significantly from one year to the next. And my dad said to me, he's like, and I expressed some frustration that I was like, I'm supposed to be getting promoted, but I'm not going to. And he said, Colleen, there are people who deserve to be promoted who are getting promoted. Why aren't you one of them? And we talked through strategies around how to raise the conversation, how to do so respectfully, but also how to be persistent and how to know your value. And I was successful in that. And it's greatly impacted my ability to be successful from there on out.
That is beautiful. Thank you, Colleen. This was really wonderful. This is our first Knowing Me, Knowing You podcast. I love that we landed on that note of really getting to know not only you, but those seedlings of you as you became an adult and kind of became independent that really crafted this really successful path forward. Thank you. I'm really grateful for you.
Of course. Grateful for you as well.
Thank you for joining us on the Knowing Me, Knowing You podcast. If you enjoyed this episode, share it with someone who needs to hear it. And don't forget to subscribe, rate, and review. Your support helps us bring more transformative conversations to you. Until next time, keep discovering, keep growing, and remember, you're in control of your own financial story. Follow us for more conversations on financial confidence, self-discovery, and the future of money.